On some of my recent videos, I've been reading a lot of very nice comments from you guys saying that you really like my simple and cozy photography and even videography style. So at the risk of this possibly sounding like a little bit of a humble brag, I want to share some of those tips today, because I definitely don't see myself as some kind of amazingly technically brilliant photographer and definitely not videographer. I have a pretty good grasp of the basics, which I've worked on for a very long time, but definitely no like amazing technical know-how or anything like that. And I think that a few very simple tips and ideas about how we think about our imagery and how we shoot can go a really long way. So today I want to share those ideas, my processes and tips that I think almost anybody can start applying to their photography and pretty much straight away get better results. Okay, so I mentioned that I wasn't a very technical photographer. So let's just quickly run through that and how I shoot from a technical perspective, just to get it out of the way. I like to keep my photography pretty simple. I have a good grasp of the basic stuff. I try to find good lighting wherever I can. I have a good idea of how to use shutter speeds and apertures to my advantage, but I don't really think this stuff is that important to the style or the best photos that I've ever taken. However, if there is one technical thing that I think is most important to the way I shoot, it's probably composition. And I would say for any beginner photographer or photographer who's looking to get better, one of the best ways that you can get better faster is just by really mastering composition. And in particular, when it comes to composition, I really like to keep an eye on a few different things. I tend to use composition techniques such as leading lines and framing quite a lot in my photography to just add a little bit of interest. I look for things like symmetry in my photographs, and most important of all to me is balance. I always trying to find balance in my frame and in my photographs. Finding balance is often an experiment for me in my photographs, but I would say more often than not it ends up in me decluttering my frame, trying to make it a bit simpler with intention. By taking more things out, I tend to find it easier to find balance for the things that I actually want in the frame. Okay, now that we have the technical side of things out of the way, let's talk about some of the more abstract concepts. And one of the most important of those is I always think about what I'm feeling when I'm out taking photographs. When I say that out loud, it sounds maybe a little overly abstract, but I also think it's important. I always have that with me when I'm taking a photo. I'm always asking myself the question, what am I feeling? What do I want the viewer to feel? And how can I convey that feeling in this photograph? Usually that means focusing on things. Usually for me that means focusing on the intangible stuff. Things like the weather, smells, atmosphere. Like how does a photograph feel? What is the vibe that I'm trying to give across here, you know? Things like warmth or summer, or even food. Like food is a bit more visual, I guess, but there is definitely a feeling to food that you can convey. In the absolute most simplest terms, I'm thinking about what am I feeling here and how can I convey this in my photograph. For example, in some photographs like this one right here, I intentionally went quite wide and I wanted to convey the feeling of people outside in the park in the sun. So like when I'm thinking about that, there is of course technical sides to this, but once you have a good grasp of the basics and composition in particular, like I said, then you can start thinking about, okay, this is how I want this photograph to feel. And like this one, for example, I wanted it to be wide and open. I wanted there to be a lot of space. I wanted it to be quite simple so we can all relate to it in a way. I wanted it to be bright because in summer it's bright. That makes you feel the photograph more. I wanted people to be just huddled around in those groups. I wanted to capture that in a way so you can all get that feeling of just hanging out with your group of friends while there's another group of friends hanging out somewhere else on a summer evening. None of that stuff is overly technical, I think. It's a very basic shutter speed. It's very basic aperture. I barely thought about it. I probably had my shutter speed and aperture pretty much fixed for the entire evening I was shooting this. I was more thinking about what I was feeling. And I think this photograph is a great example of that. Of course, this is a bit easier at specific times of the year. Like for me, autumn is perfect for this kind of feeling or capturing a mood, and that usually comes in the weather. It's a really good way to do it. And this is an example of maybe a photograph where I was thinking a lot about feeling, but at the opposite time of the year. So here I'm just walking through here again. I'm not thinking so much about my aperture or my shutter speed or anything really like that. Actually right here I was probably thinking about how wet my camera was getting, and I was slightly terrified that it was going to break. Here it was just walking through, and it was one of these misty, moody autumn mornings. And I want to think, okay, this is really cool. I'm really digging the feeling of this. How can I show that in a photograph? I want to find the colors. I'm looking at the autumn colors here. I'm looking at the mist. How can I show that mist on an autumn morning? So I find this slightly open space where it's a little bit more visible. Sometimes you can add to this a little bit in the editing to really amplify that mood and that feeling that you're trying to find. I somehow luckily stumbled across this woman with this umbrella just in the middle of the park. All adds to that kind of quiet Sunday morning here in Germany, which captures the feeling. Not so much what the photograph looks like or how pretty it looks. It's all about what I'm feeling at the time and what I want the viewers to feel. The second thing that I'm thinking about when I'm out and about shooting a lot is theme and story. I've made a video on storytelling in the past. It's a big hobby of mine. I love anything that's like story related, and every time I go out to shoot photos, it's my way of just doing that in the best way I know how. It's not always possible, it's not something you might always want to do, but whenever I can, I try to be as clear as possible on the theme of my photographs or the story that I want to tell in my photographs. Actually, having this YouTube channel is something that's helped me a lot in this, because it helps me to focus a bit more on what I want my photographs to be about. And I think that's a good thing to practice for pretty much anybody that wants to go out and take photos. It's always fun to just go out and shoot and have some fun, but I find that it takes your photos to another level when you have a little bit of a photo story to tell, or you want your photographs to be about something. And this then will give you the time when you are out shooting to think about what I mentioned in the previous point. How you can tell that story and how you can convey the feelings that you want to convey. You have to know what you want to talk about before you know how you're going to talk about it. Or you have to know what story you want to tell before you know how to tell that story. For this reason, I like to show my photos in sequences or alongside multiple photographs. I'm not a big fan of just having like one photograph to try and capture everything in that. I think that's an art in itself and it's really skillful, but I really love looking at photos, both my own and other people's, in context with other photos, because that allows me to really dig deeper into different elements where it's not possible to get everything in one shot. So that allows you to look at wider frames, for example, where you take images of a whole setting or scene. That allows you to dive deeper into the details, where you can get closer up and you can get deeper into those things that can give you the small subtleties of a story or the theme that you want to talk about. I think about my photos like a movie a lot. Like I have close-ups and cutaway shots, and then I have main shots that focus on the main thing that I want to talk about. I want to pull the attention of the viewer to different things here and there. Sprinkle little pieces of the story around the place. And finally, that brings us to subjects. Now, I mean, this is a pretty obvious one, I guess. I'm obviously thinking about my subjects when I'm out to shoot. So we have feeling, we have theme and story, and adding those together and using those to influence the subjects of each individual photograph. So when I'm out shooting, I'm always thinking about the subjects, what they're going to be, where they are, but in particular, what is the subject's relationship to everything else in the frame? And this is a tip that was given to me a while back that really helped me to have better photos pretty much straight away. It's not so much about the subject itself. The subject can be cool and interesting, and that's all well and good, but it's about thinking about what is that subject's relationship with everything else in the frame, and what is that subject's relationship to the feeling that I'm trying to convey and the story that I'm trying to tell. And this is where what I mentioned earlier really comes into play, and those composition tips. So I guess this is the most technical of all of the points that I mentioned. Having a good grasp of basic composition can really help you to show how that subject is interacting with its environment. So let's talk about some examples here again. Going back specifically to the summer video I made last week, subjects were very important because summer is summer. You can show it and feel it, but there has to be some subjects in the photographs as well. Without them, you can have some really cool shots, of course, but they can help amplify the story or the theme that you're trying to convey. So for example, in this shot of the dome, I took a few of the dome on itself, just to show the grandeur and the amazing kind of beautiful sunset that it was. But I also wanted to show it in relationship to other things. So I was lucky enough to find this girl here taking a picture of the dome, so I just stepped back a few steps and got her in my frame as well. The silhouette adds a lot, I think, to it. The size and the spectacle of the dome, but also in relationship to this person that's just walking by it and enjoying it for what it is. And that just adds a little bit of extra depth to the photograph and to what it is that I'm trying to say. Sorry, for those of you that don't know, the dome is just the German way of saying the cathedral. It's what they call it here in Cologne. But I also wanted to show it by the river and how that's kind of a whole thing here. Like the whole grabbing a beer, enjoying the sunset by the river. So I looked around my settings and see how it could relate to the other aspects as well. I came across these two bikes waiting for their owners to come back and collect them after the sun goes down. You can see the reflection of the dome in the water. You can barely make it out. But with the textures and the color of the sun setting on the water, but in the sequence, the two subjects worked well together, and you can really amplify that feeling of what it is that I'm trying to say. To give a very basic example of what I saw on the weekend, I was walking past the lake and I saw this kayaker going out to kayak. This is your classic summer photo. Kayaker on a lake, mountains in the background. Very easy shot to take. But you can also show this shot here without the kayaker. You can show the lake just as it is with the mountains in the background. It's still pretty. But having that kayaker in the frame gives scale to everything else. It gives more emphasis to everything else around it. It gives the feeling of somebody enjoying the landscape for what it is, making the most out of the summer and the water and everything else that's in this frame. It tells more of a story. Another example from last week's photos that I really liked was this one here. These two trees framing the guys playing the sport on the grass. It felt very summery, but there's something else I wanted to add to it, and that was there was bikes just cycling past me as I was taking photographs. So I waited for one to just cycle into the frame, and I found that the relationship between the main subject, which is the guys in focus here playing the sport, in relationship with another guy just cycling past. And that to me helps just amplify the little bit of feeling that I was talking about earlier. It helped to amplify the story that I was talking about earlier. Just having the cyclist in the foreground helps to give a little bit more context to the situation that we're in here with these guys playing the sport on the grass. So yeah, those are the things that I think about when I'm out shooting. I don't know if you could call this a tutorial or if those even qualify as tips. They're so abstract, but they are small things that I keep in my head a lot. And I think that if you keep them in your head too, maybe they can help you take better photos pretty quick, actually. If you try and think about those when you're out shooting, they can improve your photography pretty much straight away. So I hope they help. Let me know in the comments either way. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back with another video very soon.